Can dust have a sound? In the white-hot stillness of the Andalusian afternoon, Elena thought it did. A dry, sifting whisper that coated everything. The cracked earth of the fields, the peeling whitewash of the houses huddled around the plaza, the back of her own throat. It was the sound of waiting, of endurance, of life baked down to its hard, unforgiving core. 1948. The war was over, they said, but here in the pueblo of Almendro, nestled like a forgotten stone in the parched hills near Córdoba, the peace felt thin, brittle. Hunger was a constant neighbour, and debt, a shadow that stretched longer and darker than any cast by the merciless sun. Elena, barely 22, but with eyes that held the weary wisdom of ages, knelt beside her mother Sophia, sorting shriveled olives. Sophia's hands, gnarled and trembling slightly, fumbled with the task, her gaze distant. Beside them, Matteo, Elena's father, sat hunched on a low stool, carving a piece of wood with deceptive idleness. His face, etched with lines deeper than the dry riverbeds, was a mask of stoic resignation. He coughed, a dry rasp that echoed the dusty air. "We need rain, Hija," Sophia murmured, her voice thin as thread. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Rain wouldn't pay the debt. Rain wouldn't soften the heart of Doña Isabel, the administrator of the absent cacique's vast lands, the woman who held their lives and half the villages in her meticulously kept ledgers. The latest harvest had been meagre, another failure in a string of them. The debt, small at first, had grown monstrous under Isabel's calculated interest. The sound of sharp, deliberate footsteps crunching on the path outside made all three stiffen. Matteo slowly put down his carving. Sophia's hand flew to the worn wooden cross hanging at her neck. Elena felt a familiar coldness seep into her bones. Doña Isabel stood framed in the doorway, a severe figure in black, her face pale and sharp beneath a tightly pinned mantilla. Her eyes, small and piercing, swept over the humble room, lingering on the meagre pile of olives, the patched clothes, the palpable poverty. She carried herself with the rigid righteousness of one who believed suffering was deserved. "Matteo, Sophia." Her voice was crisp, devoid of warmth. "The time has come. The debt must be settled." Matteo rose slowly, his face impassive. "Doña Isabel, we have little. The harvest." "The harvest is always the excuse," Isabel cut him off, her thin lips tightening. "The cacique is not a charity. Obligations must be met, or consequences faced." She let the word hang in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Eviction, perhaps involving the ever-present Guardia Civil, or dredging up some forgotten transgression of Matteo's. Elena knew Isabel missed nothing. Sophia began to weep silently, rocking back and forth. Matteo's shoulders slumped, the picture of defeat. Elena watched him, a familiar ache in her chest. He always seemed so broken by it all. Isabel's gaze shifted to Elena, sharp and assessing. "However," she continued, a cruel semblance of consideration entering her tone, "there might be an alternative, a way to contribute to the household's obligations." She paused. "Your daughter, Elena? She seems strong. She reads, I hear." Elena flinched. Her grandmother had taught her a small secret pride now twisted into a liability. "I require assistance at the cortijo, household duties, keeping records in order, diligent work, naturally." Elena understood immediately. It wasn't an offer, it was a demand. Indentured servitude, thinly veiled. To work under Isabel's constant scrutiny, enduring her coldness, her pious pronouncements masking avarice. "She will work off the debt," Isabel stated, not asked. "She will come tomorrow morning. See that she is presentable." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked away, her black figure receding into the blinding sunlight, leaving silence and despair in her wake. Sophia's weeping intensified. Matteo put a hand on Elena's shoulder, his touch surprisingly firm beneath the guise of wariness. "It is a hard thing, Hija," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But it is for the family. We must endure what God sends us." Elena looked at her father's resigned face, at her mother's quiet desperation. The dust seemed to settle heavier in the room, the silence deeper. Duty, thick and suffocating, wrapped around her heart. There was no choice. There never was. Tomorrow, she would walk to the cortijo, the grand house that oversaw their misery, and step into the spider's web. The cortijo was imposing, its whitewashed walls cleaner, its terracotta roof tiles intact, unlike the crumbling homes in the village. Inside it was cool and dim, smelling faintly of beeswax and something else, the metallic scent of old money and tightly held power. Elena's days became a blur of scrubbing floors under Doña Isabel's hawk-eyed supervision, polishing furniture that gleamed with a richness alien to her own life, and increasingly assisting with the ledgers. Isabel, it turned out, was meticulous. Every transaction, every measure of grain loaned, every day of labour owed, was recorded in her sharp, angular script. She would dictate figures to Elena, her voice crisp, often pausing to deliver pronouncements on the villagers' supposed laziness or lack of piety, justifying the harsh terms she imposed. "God helps those who help themselves, Elena," she'd say, adjusting the severe black collar of her dress. "These people, they expect charity while shirking honest work." Elena learned to keep her face blank, her hands steady as she wrote down numbers that represented lifetimes of struggle for people she knew. Her literacy, once a small comfort, now felt like a curse, forcing her into proximity with the mechanics of oppression. She saw the interest rates, the way small debts ballooned impossibly. She saw entries for supplies supposedly distributed that she knew never reached the intended families. She saw discrepancies, small at first, easily dismissed as errors, but persistent. A column that didn't quite add up. A name entered against a debt already settled through back-breaking labour. Her father visited occasionally, bringing meagre offerings of food saved from their own table. He'd watch her work, his face etched with sorrow. "It is a heavy burden, hija," he'd sigh, his eyes avoiding hers. "But you are strong. You do this for your mother, for us. Observe Doña Isabel, learn how things are done. Perhaps understanding her ways will ease the path." He spoke of endurance, of patience. Sometimes he'd ask quiet, seemingly innocent questions. "Does she keep separate books for the cacique, do you think? Or, that land dispute with the Romero family, did she record the final agreement?" Elena, initially grateful for his concern, began to feel a flicker of unease at the direction of his inquiries, though she quickly dismissed it as her own growing paranoia. Sophia, when Elena managed brief visits home, seemed more anxious than ever. She'd clutch Elena's hand, whispering prayers, her eyes darting nervously towards Matteo. "Be careful, Elena. Be careful what you see, what you hear. Some doors are best left closed." Elena attributed it to her mother's natural worry. One sweltering afternoon, Elena was sent to fetch water from the well near the olive groves. She saw Luis, a young man from the village whose family was also deeply indebted, working nearby, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He looked even thinner than usual. Cautiously, Elena approached him. They exchanged weary greetings, the shared burden creating a fragile trust. "She took another lamb from my father yesterday," Luis muttered, wiping sweat from his brow with a dusty forearm. "Said it was for back payment. But I saw the ledger myself last month. We were clear." "Are you sure, Luis?" Elena asked softly. He spat onto the dry earth. "As sure as I am standing here. She changes things, moves figures. My father argued, and she threatened him with the Guardia, said he was questioning her honesty before God." He lowered his voice. They say she keeps 2 sets of books, one for the cacique in Seville and one for herself." He glanced around nervously. "Be careful in there, Elena. That house has ears." Luis's words solidified Elena's simmering suspicions into cold certainty. She started paying closer attention, memorizing figures, noting inconsistencies during Isabel's dictation, comparing entries when she had a fleeting moment alone with the books. The small errors formed a pattern. It wasn't just usury, it was systematic theft, masked by piety and meticulous records that were, in fact, carefully falsified. She saw how land titles were subtly altered, how payments vanished, how aid meant for the village seemed to evaporate. The risk was immense. Discovery would mean instant dismissal, likely followed by repercussions for her entire family far worse than the existing debt. Yet, the image of Luis's weary face, of her mother's fear, of the entire village trapped in this suffocating web, fueled a quiet, burning resolve. She had to do something, but how? She was just one girl, trapped inside the fortress of the oppressor. The knowledge felt like a physical weight, heavy and dangerous. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Doña Isabel was summoned away for several days to deal with a family matter in Córdoba. She left Elena with strict instructions and a mountain of tasks, including organizing the chaotic back office where old records were stored. It was a dusty, neglected room, filled with crumbling papers and forgotten accounts. Working late into the evenings, fueled by bitter coffee and a growing sense of urgency, Elena sifted through the piles. Beneath a stack of irrelevant crop reports from years past, her fingers brushed against a different kind of ledger. Smaller, bound in worn leather, unlike the official books Isabel used daily. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling hands, she opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably Isabel's, but the numbers told a different story. Here were the real figures, stark and damning. Records of funds received from the cacique that never appeared in the main accounts. Notes on land acquired through coerced sales at laughably low prices. Calculations of personal profits skimmed from every transaction. It was all there, the meticulous documentation of years of embezzlement and fraud, far exceeding the already cruel exploitation Elena had witnessed. This was the second set of books Louise had whispered about. Clutching the ledger, Elena felt a surge of mingled terror and triumph. This was the proof. This could bring Isabel down, but how to use it? Going to the Guardia Civil was unthinkable. They were often seen taking coffee and likely bribes at the cortijo. Taking it directly to the cacique in Seville was impossible for her. She thought of Luis. He had family, distant relatives who worked outside the village, sometimes travelling to the city. It was a slim chance, fraught with danger for both of them. The next day, feigning illness to get away from the cortijo for an hour, Elena met Luis secretly in the sparse shade of the olive grove. Her hands shook as she explained what she had found, showing him the small, damning ledger. Luis's eyes widened, first in fear, then in a flicker of grim hope. "My cousin, he goes to Seville next week," Luis whispered, glancing around constantly. "He works for a merchant. He owes Isabel nothing. Maybe he could deliver this, anonymously, to the cacique's main office?" It was their only chance. Elena carefully wrapped the ledger in plain cloth. "Tell him to be careful, Luis. Tell him just to leave it where someone will find it. No names. Nothing." Luis nodded, his face pale but determined. "Vaya con Dios, Elena." Elena returned to the cortijo, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the oppressive silence. The waiting began, each day stretching into an eternity of forced composure and gnawing anxiety. She performed her duties mechanically, avoiding Isabel's sharp eyes upon her return, terrified that some slip, some flicker of knowledge in her own expression, would betray her. Weeks passed. Nothing happened. Elena's hope began to fray, replaced by the chilling fear that the ledger had been lost, intercepted, or simply ignored. Perhaps the cacique didn't care, or was complicit himself. The weight of failure settled upon her. Then, one morning, two stern-faced men in city clothes arrived at the cortijo, not Guardia Civil, but officials of some kind, carrying briefcases. They spoke quietly with Doña Isabel in her office for a long time. Elena, working nearby, strained to hear, catching only fragments, discrepancies, audit serious irregularities. Later that day, Doña Isabel emerged, her face paler than usual, her composure finally cracked. She didn't look at Elena or any of the other staff. She packed a small bag, her movements stiff and jerky. The men escorted her to a waiting car. It drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and stunned silence. News spread through Almendro like wildfire. Doña Isabel was gone, disgraced, removed by the cacique himself. Whispers filled the plaza, embezzlement, fraud, years of deceit finally brought to light. There was a palpable sense of shock, mingled with a cautious, almost fearful surge of relief. People looked at each other with wide eyes, daring to hope. Elena felt a dizzying wave of vindication, quickly followed by exhaustion. She had done it. She had struck a blow against the suffocating power that had ruled their lives. When she saw Luis later, he gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod, a shared understanding passing between them. That evening at home, the atmosphere was strangely subdued. Sophia wept, murmuring prayers of thanks, but her eyes still held a familiar flicker of fear. Matteo sat quietly, staring into the small fire in the hearth. "You were brave, he said finally, his voice low. "But the world is complicated. One snake removed does not mean the nest is empty." Elena frowned, troubled by his lack of overt relief, his strangely calm, almost satisfied demeanour. It wasn't the reaction of a man freed from his tormentor. It felt watchful, calculated. A cold sliver of doubt, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through her relief. Why did her father, the picture of resigned suffering, seem almost content? The victory felt suddenly hollow, the silence in the room no longer peaceful, but charged with an unspoken tension she couldn't yet name. The weeks following Doña Isabel's departure did not bring the transformation Elena had hoped for. A new administrator arrived, a distant cousin of the cacique, less overtly cruel perhaps, but just as demanding. The debts remained. The poverty persisted. The brief flicker of hope in the village dimmed, replaced by the familiar resignation. The system hadn't changed, only the face at its head. Elena, no longer working at the cortijo, tried to settle back into the rhythm of village life, but the unease lingered. Mateo's quiet satisfaction after Isabel's fall continued to bother her. He seemed lighter somehow. He offered opinions more readily in village discussions, subtle suggestions about managing the communal well, or negotiating terms with the new administrator. People listened. He had endured, suffered alongside them, and now his quiet wisdom seemed valuable. Sophia remained anxious, her warnings to Elena becoming more frequent, though still frustratingly vague. "Don't stir the ashes, Elena. Let sleeping dogs lie." One rainy afternoon, Elena was tidying their small, cramped house. Mateo was out, supposedly checking snares he'd set in the hills. While clearing a shelf near the hearth, cluttered with Mateo's few possessions, his carving tools, a worn prayer book, some old papers, her hand brushed against a loose stone in the wall behind it. Curiosity piqued. She wiggled it gently. It came free, revealing a small, dark cavity within the wall. Her heart began to pound. Hesitantly, she reached inside. Her fingers closed around something small and rectangular. A book, not a printed prayer book, but a notebook, bound in cheap, stiff cardboard, the kind used for keeping accounts. She pulled it out, her hands trembling. It wasn't Doña Isabel's sharp script inside. It was Mateo's careful, surprisingly neat handwriting. Page after page detailed transactions, names, dates, amounts. But these weren't just records of their own meagre farm dealings. They were notes on villagers' debts, cross-referenced with Isabel's known demands. Calculations of land values. Names of minor officials in nearby towns with small sums listed beside them. Subtle observations on Isabel's habits, her weaknesses, her movements. It was a meticulous, chilling record of observation and manipulation spanning years. There were notes anticipating Isabel's downfall, plans for how certain land parcels, likely to become available after her removal, could be acquired cheaply through intermediaries. Strategies for gaining influence with the new administrator, whoever that might be. It laid bare a long game, a patient, ruthless scheme to gain covert control, using Isabel's predictable greed and eventual disgrace as stepping stones. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. She sank onto the stool, the notebook heavy as lead in her lap. Her father. Her quiet, suffering, pious father. He hadn't just endured. He had watched, planned, calculated. He had likely known about Isabel's deeper corruption all along, perhaps even subtly encouraged it, waiting for the right moment. He had guided Elena's own investigation, not out of concern, but to ensure Isabel's removal served his own hidden purpose. Her sacrifice, her fear, her brief moment of perceived justice, it had all been part of his plan. The blood drained from her face, leaving her cold and nauseous. The whispers of her mother, the strange calmness of her father, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Mateo returned an hour later, shaking rain from his worn coat. He stopped short when he saw Elena sitting white-faced, the notebook open on the table between them. His eyes, usually downcast or resigned, sharpened instantly. The mask didn't just slip, it vanished, replaced by a look of cold, hard intelligence Elena had never seen before. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken horror. "So," Mateo said, his voice devoid of its usual weary rasp. It was flat, controlled. "You found it?" Elena couldn't speak. She could only stare at the stranger who was her father. He walked slowly towards the table, pulling up the other stool. He didn't look angry or even surprised. He looked appraising. "I wondered when your curiosity would lead you there," he continued calmly. "You have your grandmother's sharp eyes, a useful trait sometimes." All this time, Elena finally choked out, gesturing numbly at the notebook. "Isabel? Me? It was all you?" Mateo leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. Isabel was a greedy fool, predictable, useful for a time. Her fall was inevitable. I merely ensured it happened in a way that cleared the path. Cleared the path? For what? Elena whispered, horrified. For order, for control, for someone who understands how things truly work in this valley, Mateo said. a chilling conviction in his voice. "Did you think I would spend my entire life bowing and scraping, watching my family starve while fools like Isabel lined their pockets and landowners in Seville ignored us? This village, this land, it owed me. My father lost everything here, cheated by the cacique's grandfather. I have spent my life watching, waiting, planning, to take back what should have been ours, to build something lasting. By manipulating everyone? By using your own daughter?" The betrayal felt like a physical blow. Matteo waved a dismissive hand. "Necessity, Elena. Sacrifice. You played your part well. Unknowingly, yes, but effectively. Isabel's removal creates opportunities. The new administrator will need guidance. The villagers will need a strong hand, someone they trust, someone who has suffered with them." He smiled faintly, a terrifying distortion of his familiar features. "Someone like me." He saw himself not as a villain, but as a strategist, a hidden ruler reclaiming his due through cunning. His piety, his suffering, it had all been a meticulously crafted performance. Elena saw the depth of his ambition, the chilling justification he had built for himself over decades of silent resentment. "And Mother?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible. "Does she know?" Matteo's expression flickered for a fraction of a second. "Your mother understands the need for survival. She worries as women do, but she knows her place." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers. "You understand now, Elena. You see the real game. You are my daughter. Clever, observant. You could be part of this. Help me secure our family's future, a real future, not this scraping existence." Elena recoiled as if burned. The offer, the assumption that she could possibly accept this monstrous reality, broke something inside her. The image of her father, the man she had pitied and tried to protect, shattered completely, replaced by this cold, calculating manipulator. The entire foundation of her world had crumbled. Her fight for justice had been a lie, a tool in the hands of the man she called father. She stood up, her legs unsteady. "No," she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Never." Matteo watched her, his eyes narrowed. He didn't argue. He simply leaned back, a flicker of disappointment, perhaps, but most calculation, already recalibrating his plans. Elena turned away from him, from the suffocating intimacy of the small room that now felt like a tomb. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't live under the same roof as this man, this truth. She couldn't look her mother in the eye, knowing Sophia likely suspected, or at least feared, the truth and chose silence. She couldn't face the villagers, knowing their supposed liberation was just another turn of a hidden screw. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay listening to the rain drumming on the roof, each drop echoing the hollowness inside her. Before the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky grey, she rose. She packed a small bundle, a change of clothes, the little bread left from supper, the few coins she had managed to save. She didn't take the notebook. It belonged to his world, his lies. She paused at the door, looking back at the sleeping forms of her parents. Sophia stirred, a soft sigh escaping her lips. Did she know Elena was leaving? Did she understand why? Elena couldn't be sure. She slipped out into the damp pre-dawn chill. The village was silent, asleep. The plaza was empty, washed clean by the night's rain. Elena didn't look towards the cortijo. She walked quickly, purposefully, down the path leading away from Almendro, towards the main road, towards the unknown. Towards Seville, perhaps, or Malaga, or just away. She didn't know where she was going, or what she would do. The future was a terrifying blank. But as she walked, putting distance between herself and the suffocating web of deceit, a small, hard kernel of something new formed within the emptiness. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. She had lost her family, her home, her illusions. But she had found a devastating truth. And in leaving, she was choosing herself, choosing to walk away from the corruption that wore her father's face. It was a bitter, lonely freedom, purchased at a terrible price, but it was hers. Behind her, the village of Almendro slept on, unaware of the true nature of the man who was quietly tightening his grip, the dust settling once more. Elena did not look back.